Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Executive MBA taster session on markets and consumers of the future. Also, if you could just go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So my name is Lucky Singh, and I'm the Client Relationship Manager here at King's Business School, and I oversee the recruitment side of things for our executive education programs and our executive MBA program. So if you are interested in the executive MBA, you're most likely going to be speaking to me or have already spoken to me. So joining me today is Professor Oguz Acar, who is the Professor of Marketing and Innovation here at King's College London and Business School. And he actually runs the Markets and Consumers of the Future module that is on the Executive MBA program. So if you do come onto the MBA program, then Oguz will be the one teaching you. So I'm going to hand over to Oguz now to take you through the taster session. Any questions, please pop them through the Q&A or the chat function, and we can answer those as we go. But we will also have a Q&A towards the end, so you can ask Oguz any questions that you have then. But yeah, without further ado, over to you, Oguz.
Thank you very much, Lucky. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Oz. You can call me Oz, most people do. And in case you're wondering, just a little kind of brief background, that's actually kind of a Turkish name. That's where I studied. And you might also be wondering a little bit about where does this strange accent is coming from. And that comes from all the places that I worked and studied. So before moving to UK, I've done my PhD in the Rotterdam School of Management at Erasmus University. Then I have worked at MIT and NYU Stern as a visiting scholar, after which I moved here. So this combination of all these different places that I have been. But let's talk about our taster session today. And I wanted to talk to you about strategic brand management. And to illustrate the importance of brand, I brought you these 2 cups of coffee. So let's think. Imagine I've taken out the Starbucks logo from the cup. How much would you pay for the identical coffee? When I put the logo, it probably as a consumer helps you in a number of ways. At the most basic level, when you look at the Starbucks coffee cup, you will be able to identify what the product is. It's going to reduce your search costs, and it can actually communicate your features and benefits, facilitate your evaluation process, reduces your risk of purchasing. You would know what you're getting. In short, it makes your purchase decision easier. And as a brand, for me, it also helps me in a number of ways. I can start building loyalty of consumers. It can help me defend against competition. And when I put the Starbucks logo out there, I can charge significantly higher pricing. And one of the best examples of the value of branding for marketers and companies is the blind test comparing Pepsi and Coca-Cola. So maybe you have seen some of them already. It used to be very kind of famous, and they were done and broadcast in the TV as well. So what we see is that Coca-Cola does much better on a global level, and there's been a number of blind tests that compare Pepsi with Coca-Cola, and here's what we see in the results overall. In blind tests, so imagine a blind test as you have 2 cups and you have 2 different kind of colas, and you don't know which one you're drinking. In blind tests, people overwhelmingly prefer Pepsi over Coca-Cola. In fact, one of the statistics that I've found was that 51% of the people prefer Pepsi, 44% prefer Coca-Cola. But the moment when you put the brands there, 65% of people prefers Coca-Cola over Pepsi. So this just shows just the sheer fact of putting a brand on the drinks change consumers' preferences significantly. But the effect of brands actually goes beyond driving choice. Here's an interesting study that's published in one of the top marketing journals a while ago. So what they did is they've conducted a series of experiments, and I'm going to explain you one. And in that study, they randomly assigned people to two experimental conditions. One group of participants saw Apple logo, and the other saw IBM. They then asked these participants to undertake some creativity tests. Guess what? Those who were exposed to Apple logo were significantly more creative than those who were exposed to IBM logo. And remember, these are not people that are actually using Apple versus IBM. This is just simple exposure to a logo. And why? Why do we think those who are exposed to Apple are more creative than those exposed to IBM? And you might recollect Apple's kind of big branding campaign and brand positioning around Think Different, that embrace, encourage, and kind of owned creativity. And we've seen in the study, they also did it for a number of different brands, and they see similar results. And here's another, perhaps even more interesting study, in which researchers at Wharton, Michael Platt and his co-authors, they wanted to look at and study neurological responses of Apple versus Samsung users. So Apple has one of the most loyal customer bases in the world, with like a lot of different kind of surveys and studies shows that it's one of the kind of most, it has really significant customer loyalty. And what they wanted to do is they conducted a study in which they've scanned brains of Samsung and Apple users. So they used fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, and they looked at the kind of brain responses of these people when they viewed a positive news about Apple, negative news about Apple, or neutral news about Apple. And they did the same for Samsung users too. And what they found is, I think, truly interesting, because notice that this is about neurological, biological level responses. So the reward-related areas of the brain were activated by good news about Apple when they looked at Apple users, and they actually found when they saw that the bad news about Apple, the pain and negative feeling parts of their brain was activated. When they were hearing news about Samsung, they were neutral. And meanwhile, Samsung users didn't show any significant pain or pleasure-related brain activity when they saw good or bad news. The only thing they found, perhaps interestingly, is what they refer to as a reverse empathy. So they found that when they were happier, or their reward areas of their brains were activated when they heard bad news about Apple. This just shows how strongly brands can influence above and beyond purchase choices, purchase decisions, reducing risk for consumers, and so on and so forth. So what is a brand? So now that we kind of established that brands are important, they can make consumers' life easier, and they're strategically important for companies because they can bring about eventually some competitive advantage as well. We can think of brands in 4 elements. One is the most obvious one: tangible, product packaging, name, design. But beyond that, it also has an intangible element, as illustrated in some of the studies that I have just presented. There are intangible components like personality, image, values. And we've also kind of illustrated in one of the studies that it also affects purchase decision. There's this differentiation component as well. And finally, there's also the relationship component. It is about the relationship between buyer and seller. So I think we kind of made the case that brands are valuable. And in fact, brand equity, the concept of brand equity, which we see this as a measure of brand's value, is one of the most important factors that marketers track. So brand equity is very simply, it is about measuring a brand's value. And we have a bunch of different models that we see that are used by marketers. One of my favorite ones and one of the most widely used one is Acar's brand equity model. And this brand equity model as you see in this graph here, has 5 components. What it means is those 5 components make up a brand's equity, or we can say value. One of them is brand awareness. So how much is your brand known by consumers? The other one is perceived quality. So the kind of perceptions around the quality of the brand that you have, why it also it also relates to why your brand is chosen. And the other component is brand associations. So what do people think about your brands? What do they associate your brand with? And brand loyalty. So how much is your brand preferred compared to others? And finally, a large group that contains a number of elements is proprietary assets such as trademarks, patents, and assets that add value. So this is, as I mentioned, this is really important for marketers to track this. And in fact, a lot of different brand agencies, global brand agencies, try to track the equity value of different numbers. So in essence, what they do is they, using different methodologies across different models, they attach a financial value for your brand in their models. So here's one very famous one, is the one that's done by Interbrand. And every year they provide a list of top 100 global brands. And I have a quiz for you, so you can write your answers on the chat. So thinking about the kind of definition and conceptualization of brand equity, which of these do you think was not part of the top 10 global brands list in 2022? Again, in terms of brand equity. So if you write your answers on the chat, we can see whether you will get this right or not. Let's see what we get here. The Disney, we have the Disney. Anyone else who wants to give it a go? Disney, another Disney. Let's see whether the wisdom of crowds will succeed in this particular case. I'm gonna wait 10 more seconds if you want to share your answer. All right, let's reveal the winner. Wisdom of crowds, I'm afraid, didn't work. So the brand that was not part of the top 10 list was McDonald's. It was, I know it was a tricky question. They were just barely number 11, but technically it was out of top 10. And any ideas about what might be the kind of top? What brand might have been the top global brand in terms of brand equity? You can write your answers to the chat as well. Good try, Lucky. Anyone else? Toyota. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, by the way, I have to say that this is somewhat perhaps misleading. The kind of number one was not one of those 4. So you can think of different brands as well. But I mentioned that brand already. So let me give away. Let's reveal the winner of last year. So here's the top 25 of that top 100 list, and Apple has been the leader. And you can also see the kind of the financial value that's attached to each of those brands. And these are not their kind of stock market value, but these are kind of their brand equity value calculated based on Interbrand's methodology. And it's by far Apple is the leader as well, and they have been leader for a while. So, by the way, let me just also mention that, please, if you have any questions, you don't need to wait until the end, and you can ask. You can just kind of unmute yourself and ask your question. I'm perfectly fine with that. Okay, so here's the question. I think so far we've established that kind of brands are important, brand equity is important because they affect a number of important marketing outcomes, such as being able to charge premium prices, such as driving consumer choices. Then $1 million question is, how do you build brand equity? And I'm afraid the answer is not very straightforward because it really depends on overall marketing strategy. So let me show you this rather complex model, phase, stage, and gate model of marketing strategy, a framework of how we go about marketing strategy. And here you will see that there are a number of important strategic and tactical actions that you undertake. And what's important is obviously I won't be able to kind of go through all of this. These are the stuff that we'll be covering if you end up being one of our students in the module. But the short answer to my previous question will be, we need to manage brands strategically. First, each and every brand decision should be informed through the broader marketing strategy, which is informed through a true understanding of the marketplace, marketing environment, the internal factors, external factors, how strategically we are fitting. And this understanding then allows us to come up with objectives and future directions. So the phase 2 of the marketing strategy, where we want to be. And branding strategy and the decisions related to strategic decisions related to branding comes here. So it comes after knowing about and identifying what our target segment is. And based on that understanding, identifying what the brand positioning we want to achieve is, right? So we want to, what kind of brand positioning is about, what kind of image in the minds of customers that we want to achieve. What do we want consumers to think about us? And that brand positioning decision, that strategic decision, then informs all the other branding decisions. And similarly, this brand positioning then inform all other more tactical decisions with respect to, for example, marketing mix, which are the kind of product strategy, price strategy, marketing communication channel strategy. And so the key, I think the key takeaway from here is that kind of the key to building brand equity is actually being able to manage that strategically. But let's look at some of the branding specific decisions that, as I just mentioned, should be informed by brand positioning. What are some of those decisions are? And there are a number of them, and we're going to be focusing on some of them today to kind of give you an idea of what are the strategic considerations that one needs to make when it comes to brand management. And those decisions range from whether to have a brand at all or not, to whether what kind of name we want to put on the products, to whether we need to revise our branding strategy. And I want to talk a little bit about brand architecture, right? And brand architecture is a model that explains what kind of brand structure we want to use for our products. And there are four main architectures, and one of them is branded house. And branded house is an approach where we have a dominant corporate brand and that we use it for all other products. I'll show an example in a second. And there's this co-branding approach where we have independent brands, but we endorse each other. And then there's this branded house. And this one, the difference of this one from branded house is that branded house sub-brand involves both the corporate brand, but also have a very strong sub-brand. So it's connected to the parent brand, but it also has its own identity. And then we have a house of brands, which is basically you have a disparate group of brands that stand alone by themselves. I know it's probably not entirely clear in your mind at this stage, but when we look at some of the examples, I think it's going to be clearer. So let's look at, and let's start with branded house. Those who are based in the UK will be probably, or US will be probably familiar with all these products. A typical, perhaps even textbook example of branded house is Virgin. So basically Virgin uses that corporate brand in all different categories in which they operate, ranging from planes, Virgin Atlantic, to broadband, to gyms, to mobile phones, across a range of categories. And co-branding, as I mentioned, you can have two brands get together and kind of join their forces and embrace each other. And perhaps one of the good examples, or at least timely examples of that, is Yeezy, the one that you are seeing on your right-hand side. That's the kind of co-branding effort by Kanye West and Adidas. And I'm not sure if you're how familiar you are with what has happened, but they have actually almost, I think, over 5 years ago, they've developed this brand that's called Yeezy, and they made a really significant commitment to each other. This has actually now on a shaky ground, to say the least. So what will happen is not very certain at this stage, but what happened is Kanye West had all these comments, anti-Semitic comments, and then that put pressure, obviously, that understandably and rightfully, that kind of created a lot of backlash, and there's been a lot of pressure on Adidas to break up this relationship, and then Adidas initially decided to break it up, but now they're trying to kind of find a way to figure out how to go about this. But anyways, so this is actually, it turned out, it used to be a case of successful co-branding, but now it is a bit more of a case of, okay, how important it is to get your co-branding partners right, and what kind of risk it introduces for your overall brand equity. Right. And the other example is branded house sub-brands. So remember, Virgin was the example of branded house. So they use that brand for every category that they are in. The difference of this is you have one corporate brand, but you also have a sub-brand that has its own identity. Sony is a good example. For example, Sony has Sony PlayStation, Sony Walkman, Sony Vaio, and so on and so forth. And the house of brands. This is basically you create new brands in different categories that you operate. And perhaps one of the best examples of that is Procter & Gamble. And these are some of the, and not, maybe not even half of them, the standalone brands that P&G has. So they are separate, they're marketed separately. They are part of the kind of parent brand, which is P&G, but it's not really communicated very proactively. So if you look at and read the kind of back of the product, and you might see that it's developed by P&G, but all the branding is done for individual brands. So most of these decisions around brand architecture and the decisions with respect to whether or not use your corporate brand or an existing brand for another category depends on the tension between leveraging versus protecting your brand equity. So most marketers, if not all, are tempted to use their existing brand equity. Why? Because if you have an existing brand, which you have developed over the years, you'll be very tempted to leverage that when you enter into a new category. If you go with that existing brand, it will allow you instant recognition, it will allow a faster acceptance, and it will save huge amount of advertising costs that will be required to build a new brand. So you kind of start this in a much better position when you leverage existing brand equity. But then you want to also think about the risks of damaging the main brand. So if things doesn't work out well, it can confuse the image and meaning of your parent brand. It can lead to undesired brand associations, and in some cases, it can even cannibalize your main product. And this tension, or this temptation, if you will, to leverage existing brand equity often leads to interesting brand extension decisions. Sometimes successful, sometimes unsuccessful. Let's look at the case of BIC. You might be familiar of this brand, BIC. So they're known for their reliable writing instruments, and they've been pretty successful in doing that. Then BIC extended their brand to the disposable lighter and razor market, and that kind of made sense in the eyes of customers. But they had to draw a line somewhere, which they didn't, and they developed a product like this one. So they entered in the underwear market, which was not very successful. And we have plenty of really good and somewhat funny examples of extensive brand extension or wrong brand extension decisions. So sometimes brands go a bit too far in stretching their brands. So for example, this is Cheetos lipstick lip balm. So with this Cheetos flavor and smell. And Colgate introduced used their brand to introduce a beef lasagna. And my favorite one is coming, ready. And Burger King at some stage thought that it was a good idea to use their existing brand equity to develop a perfume, which they called as Flame and marketed as the scent of seduction. It's basically a perfume with the scent of grilled meat. I guess we don't really need to talk much about them. They were all big failures. Actually, in fact, Colgate has a place in a museum in Sweden that's called Museum of Failure. Okay, so the question is, obviously as a marketer, if possible, you would like to be successfully extend your brand when you enter into a new category. But what determines the success of brand extensions? In the past, in my other modules, when I discuss this question, I usually need to build on a number of different academic sources and anecdotal examples to make the case. But fortunately, now we have a really fresh and robust insight into this question. So this is a meta-analysis that's basically not published yet. It's in press, and it's went through peer review, and it's published in a very high quality journal as well. And meta-analysis is just kind of a little information to kind of assess the importance of the evidence. And meta-analysis integrates a wide range of academic studies and calculates an effect size based on integrating all of them. And in this particular study that I'm going to show, which actually focused on what determines the success of brand extension, they have incorporated over 2,000 individual studies. So effectively, this is a quantitative summary of an effect on the basis of academic literature. And the answer is that there are two factors that are the significant predictors of success of a brand extension decision. One is parent brand equity, so how valuable your parent brand is, so the brand that you use to extend to another category. And the second one is extension fit. So to what extent the fit is perceived to be, to what extent the extension is perceived to be a fit. What they found is that extension fit is slightly more important than parent brand equity. But it gets obviously, it might seem, the answer might seem a bit kind of intuitive, but it gets a bit more interesting because they also look at the subcomponents of brand equity and whether or not they actually affect the success of extension in the same way. So if you remember from the earlier slides, we have a number of different components that make up collectively the brand equity, and they are brand quality, loyalty, attitude, and awareness, familiarity, right? So what I found is brand quality, attitude, and loyalty are important, whereas brand awareness didn't really have a significant effect. It had a very weak effect. Perhaps more important is the differential effects of the fit dimensions. So they looked at 3 dimensions of fit. One is usage fit. So to what extent there is a fit between the use areas of 2 different categories. The second one is concept fit. So to what extent the associations around with the brand and this NIV extended brand is a fit, and the feature fit, to what extent these two products are kind of have overlapping features. And the result again is like concept fit is the most important one, followed by feature fit, and usage fit had a smallest effect. So one of the takeaways, for example, would be when you are introducing an extension product, creating and highlighting similarities in product features versus in contrast to usage occasions, and highlighting the fit between parent brand image and the extension is more beneficial. There are also a number of contextual factors they looked at. I'm gonna just to give you an idea, I'm gonna share 2 of them. For example, they found brand equity is more important for service firms versus product firms, and extension fit effects were kind of stronger for non-prestige firms than prestige firms. Put differently, if you are a prestige firm, like let's say a Louis Vuitton or Ferrari, then extension fit is less important for the success of your brand extension. Whereas if you are not a prestige product, then you really need to make sure that there is a strong extension fit. Hope this is all clear so far. And again, as I mentioned, if you have a question, I'm happy to take any question. Oh, right. I think it was about the other point, right? Why there are more, or is this about this one?
It was about the top 10, why are the top 10 brands or the most popular brands more product-based rather than service-based?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I have an kind of evidence-based answer to that. I guess you could think that there's most of those also, like they have solutions that combines products and services. That's probably one part of that's not like just not purely product, but there's also kind of service component as well. So some of those top brands, but we can kind of come back to that and then maybe discuss by kind of putting this top 10 list in front of us. Right. So just wanna go over and talk about the future of branding a little bit. And as we mentioned, it was most important is having this strategic approach to brand management. But also brand management is going through a major transformation in the age of machine digital transformation, all this social and technological change that we are going through. And before talking about some of the ways how we can navigate brand management in this future, maybe I should say a few things about the past. Right? One of them is first take about a century ago, brand management was easy. Right? So any customer can have a car painted any color he wants as long as it's black. This famous quote is attributed to Henry Ford. So this was the situation. Customers didn't really have much of a choice. And that the producer, as the producer of the car, only car in the market, can afford the kind of strong control over this. And it changed a little bit. So if you go like let's say a couple of more five or six more decades ago, I don't know if you have seen Mad Men, but at that age, this is a TV show, which is a wonderful one if you haven't seen. Is about an advertising agency and how those creatives kind of come up with this brilliant brand management campaigns, and kind of they put it on this mass communication platforms, the TV, radio, but they control all the information. The whole idea was brand management at those ages were easy. So you kind of come up with a creative idea, you put it in a few channels, and bam, you have reached out to kind of almost entirety of the customers. But things are changing, right? So now customers are much more empowered. They have access to information. They have more choices. It's not like how it used to be, and they are more powerful. And this is it. This is becoming increasingly kind of the power is increasing also when you also consider the machines, right? So there's kind of AI also giving them increasing powers in terms of their communication, and now brands also need to think about this kind of transformation or the effect of algorithms as well. One of which is deep fakes, right? So the bottom line is traditional brand managers or traditional brands are kind of experiencing their worst nightmare, which is not having the control that they are used to or they want to have, right? So which was an entirely different story a few decades ago. So now they don't. How do they navigate this world? And for that, brands need to embrace innovative approaches. And one of those innovative approaches is to think about control differently, really. So basically, now that they're not having the control that they used to have, and they want it, because brand management is about kind of having that positioning and then trying to consistently communicate that positioning in the minds of consumers. They don't have this control anymore. And the counterintuitive idea for that, to manage that, is actually thinking about control differently. So instead of striving for this control, what if brands give away control intentionally, systematically, and strategically? And let's look at some of the examples. And giving away control means shifting the control and power to customers and in their brand related decisions. So here's one of the recent things. For example, I think this was last year, and it's very recent and it's ongoing as well, like Menu Hacks initiative or campaign of McDonald's. So they basically, in a nutshell, what they did is they allowed the customers to kind of create menus and other customers to be able to kind of order the menus that are created by others. It's been a hugely successful campaign, being trending, etc. in TikTok. Another example. What if customers actually generated your ads? So this is a phenomenon or strategy called customer generated ads. And this is something that Doritos did. And what they did is they have allowed customers to create advertisements for Doritos's Super Bowl campaigns. And this is particularly interesting because Super Bowl is one of the biggest sporting events, and certainly the biggest sporting event when it comes to putting your advertisement there, in the sense that they have the most expensive advertising slots that money can buy. And usually what most brands does is they put really high budget, super expensive production campaigns, advertisements with Hollywood stars, and really like sometimes million millions of pounds scale advertisements for that slot. Doritos kind of went all completely different way, and they basically decided to say, as a customer, you can go take your cell phone or your cheap camera and you can take an advertisement. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna let other customers to choose the best customer generated ad, and we're gonna pay for it, and then we're gonna put it in the Super Bowl. Another one, how about you create a community with your customers, with your users, and they can create new products for you and select new products for you. Or what if we give the control to customers in terms of designing their products? So we basically provide them the basis, and that's what Nike ID does, for example, here, and that's referred to as mass customization. And as a customer, you can go and fine tune and kind of create the design that you want. And let me show you an example as well. It's a very quick video.
The next sale is a digital treasure trove, charming Ellie's private data.
What?
Lot number one, her emails. The one she's opened and read, wonderfully personal. Let's start at 240, 260. 280. Sold. Lot number two, Ellie's drugstore purchases. Voila, priceless data. Do I hear 480? 500. Sold. Allocation data. It's not creepy, it's commerce. Do I hear 600? 620, 640, 660. Sold.
Nana?
All her contacts, even sweet Nana. Sold at 740. Her recent transactions. Her browsing history. A late-night texting habit. Sold. And now the one you've all been waiting for, and I can promise you won't be disappointed. Oh.
In this case, as you see, giving control over their data, giving the customer power over how they control their data. And let me just share results of a couple of studies to show that how this seemingly counterintuitive approach of actually giving away control instead of kind of sticking to it can turn out to be beneficial for the brands, right? So, for example, Muji, they commonly use user-generated designs for their products. And in one study, researchers looked at the market performance of the designs that are generated by their customers versus the designs that are generated by their kind of professional designers. And here's an interesting result. So when they looked at basically any important kind of measure that shows overall kind of performance of a company, of product, is that user-generated products has significantly outperformed designer-generated one. Let's look at, for example, sales. So what they found is in the first year, user-generated products on average user-generated products sold up to more than 3 times more. In the 3 years, the distance even was even bigger between the designer and user-generated products. They said up to almost 6 times more than designer-generated products. So it could actually, beyond kind of being a kind of a connection opportunity with customers, this giving away control could also lead to important business outcomes. And also they found it could also be a strong defense. Again, this is just an illustrative study to show what they found in this study is that they looked at how consumers respond when their data is breached. And what they found is when consumers are given some level of control in terms of what data they share, were significantly more positive about the brand, even in the case when their data was breached. So basically, the takeaway is that brands are traditionally obsessed about having control over their marketing mix elements and over brand related decisions. But the world is changing. The customers are not the same customers. They are more empowered. They are stronger. They demand more. They expect more. And rather than trying to go against and conflict with customers in terms of who's going to have the control, one idea is to actually giving away the control in an intentional, strategic, and systematic way. I think I can stop here. So we barely scratched the surface of our normal discussion, what we would have when we talk about brand management. But I think it gives you an idea of what are some of the strategic elements of brand management, as well as what are some of the why branding matters and what are some of the important considerations.
Great, thank you so much, Oz. That was really interesting and really current as well. And I really love the examples. We're opening the Q&A session, so everyone, please feel free to unmute yourself. Just raise your hand and we can just tell you to unmute, or you could put your question in the chat. Happy to answer questions about the taster session, but also about the Executive MBA program, or any question that you have generally about marketing as well. Now's the best opportunity to chat with us.
And if possible, I would love to see your faces as well. So if your background or internet connection allows, I would love to have that as well. It helps me to remain sane. To that, I'm talking to people, not the computer, right?
Oz, I think we had two people who attended a little bit late. Do you mind just recapping maybe the first couple of points?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, we started the discussion by comparing a empty, non-branded cup of coffee versus a Starbucks cup of coffee. Imagine that you have this same coffees inside. How you will respond to, and what would a Starbucks logo, the coffee with the Starbucks logo, is significantly different than one that without logo. So that's one way to illustrate the value of brands. And brands are important. That helps consumers and brands as well in a number of different ways, from helping consumers to find what they look for. I mean, imagine being in a supermarket and having only just products without any logo and in brands. It will be a miserable experience, wasn't it? So it just helps you in a number of ways, and they are very valuable as well, and they have to be managed strategically. And we have a lot of frameworks for that. And this management of brands is really connected to a number of other strategic decisions that you do at the earlier stages of your marketing, as well as some of the other decisions that you make, more tactical decisions that you do after brand related decisions. So it's really somewhere in the middle, and it requires an understanding of very strategic decisions and subsequent tactical decisions. And this is in the age of this social and technological disruption, brand management is more difficult, and how companies can navigate this environment is really remaining innovative, but also still strategic.
We have a question from Alfred. Alfred, please unmute yourself and fire away.
Hey, Alfred.
Hello, hi, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm all right, thank you. That's a very fascinating session and taster. Alfred, a PhD candidate, just about actually to finish my PhD at King's College. So on the security side, so this is a totally different but very familiar field. I had earlier asked the question on, I was particularly struck and I noticed there were a lot of more product-based companies on the top ranking brands. So I wanted to speak about that, but also a second one is the Adidas and Yeezy brand. It's of course on shaky ground right now, but thinking more broadly, how can maybe companies be, thinking about future-proofing such kind of risks associated with, the individuals or the risks that come with either associating with a particular brand that is not necessarily aligned to the society values. Because, I saw even recently they had to actually issue a profit warning, that is Adidas, because of now that ongoing separation, and it seems it's a huge risk, so what kind of insights do you have, where brands can be, be more careful about that?
Right. Brilliant questions. Let me start with the last one. Right. So I think whenever you do co-branding, you expose yourself to risk, right? Because you're using some other brand. And obviously, you can benefit from other brands' actions if things go according to plan. That's kind of whole idea of co-branding on the one hand, right? So if they do well, this co-branding endeavor will do well, and it can also even spill over to your original brand. But then you really want to do your due diligence. And especially, I think one easy reflection, also somewhat with the benefit of hindsight is that, personal brands is tricky. So if you're making a co-branding endeavor with a personal brand, you are exposing yourself to risk. And if you're doing it with with a person who is known to be controversial, then you kind of almost calling this for yourself, right? So something like that could happen. Some of the insights with personal branding, some of the insights we can use from kind of brand sponsorship endeavors that brands typically use, like for example, like Tiger Woods and other brands, right? So that all those risks are inherent when you do co-branding with an individual. But on the other hand, obviously there are some brands and have their track records, and you can obviously also do your research on that as well to understand to what extent you are exposing yourself to a risk, right? So I think that's it. So there's always that risk, because you can't, even for the most trustworthy brands. But if you're doing something with Apple, the chances are lower. If you're doing something with Meta, if you look at kind of their track record in the last 10 years, you're probably exposing yourself to a greater risk. If you're doing something with a smaller startups with limited track record, for example, you're kind of exposing yourself to a greater risk. So it's basically you want to do your due diligence on that. And in terms of this top 10 or top 100 companies and your first question, basically, I read it at the time when I was actually kind of talking about product versus service and differences between them when it comes to brand extensions. So I couldn't kind of quite figure it at that time. But I think when we look at these top brands, what we see is that some of them are providing platforms, and some of them are providing platforms, services, and products. So they're kind of offering, I think the one thing that's going to be potentially very important for brands and their future equity is this platform. So this rising importance of platforms. So Apple provides a platform for many apps, for example, and Google provides a platform. If you look at it, Amazon provides a platform, and they also offer a number of services, right? Apple services, the importance of services in Apple's business is increasing in importance every year. So when we look at the kind of statistics, it's still primarily a products company. So its money is primarily coming from iPhone and iPad, and but mostly from iPhone. But you can see that all these other services that are increasing in importance, and like I know, like their news, their Apple Music, Apple TV, and so on and so forth. So I think in terms of, if I were to kind of bet on what would be the kind of brand 10 years from now with the highest brand equity, I think it will be something that has platform that combines and puts together both products and services. So if you look at, for example, Amazon, they're kind of stronger on the kind of platform and services side, but they're also trying to get into the product side because it's also an access point, right? So beyond brand management, if you control the product, then you can also control the services. So they're trying to they're competing on that front with a number of others. But so that's basically, I think, where this is going.
Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions?
If we don't have any questions, though, we can wrap up there. I'm happy to maybe just wrap up and give you a bit more information about sort of next steps. So in terms of next steps for the Executive MBA, just wanted to let everybody know that applications are open. And I'm happy to have a one-to-one conversation with you and review your CV and to kind of see your fit for the program. We obviously have some more taster sessions and in-person events in June and July, so do keep an eye out for those. And you can email me at executivemba@kcl.ac.uk with any questions, and you can sign up for for updates and things like that on our website as well. Thank you so much, Oz, for a really interesting session. Really enjoyed it. I think everybody else here on the call also found it really insightful. And just to let everybody know, we'll be sending the recording out as well, so you will have that and you can take a look at that if you've missed anything. But yes, Oz, any final words before we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for organizing this. And I'd like to thank everyone who joined this call. And I genuinely enjoyed meeting you. And thanks for the interesting questions and taking part in my little quiz as well. Yeah, I hope I'll see you next year. And yeah, I wish you a lovely day.
Great. Thanks, Oz. Speak soon. Thanks, everybody. Take
Ciao.
care.